Hi everyone, welcome to day 2 of a very special hop with Crackerbox and Suzy stamps and Imagine Crafts. Today I'm going to be sharing with you some two-step stamping. Now I am using these leaf stamps from Crackerbox and Suzy stamps. I will have all of the supplies as always listed down in the description box. So if you have any questions about ink colors, what exactly the stamps I used are, they're all going to be down there in the description box for you to find. So like I said, I'm using those leaf stamps. Those are amazing. The detail in them, when you see them stamped, they're gorgeous. But I'm also going to be using the Imagine Crafts. These are the VersaFine Clair ink pads that are newer. And I have a few of these already. I'm going to be playing around with Chianti, Twilight, and Fallen Leaves. But I have a video on the black ink, the Nocturne ink, and what all coloring mediums that works with. It's one of my favorite black inks to use. I'll leave that linked in the top right hand corner. So for my technique today, I'm going to be using 2 different papers here. I've got my card base, which is an A2 white side folding card base. I've also got a piece of craft cardstock that is cut to A2 size, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to be stamping on both of these. I'm using my Misty. I'm going to go ahead and take out my little piece of fun foam that's in there, because when you use your rubber stamps, they already have that foam in them, so you need to take that out so they'll be able to stamp better. You need that foam in there when you stamp clear stamps, so it bumps your paper up a little bit more, gives it a little bit more cushion. So I'm first going to start off stamping on my craft cardstock. I used Fallen Leaves with that image right there. Then I want to go ahead and take out my craft cardstock, wipe down my stamp, wipe down the surface I was stamping on my Misty, and then I'll go ahead and switch out to my white cardstock. Now I've prepped my surface with my embossing bag, and I'm going to be using Versamark ink to stamp down this stamp on the white cardstock. You could use the Fallen Leaves, those are pigment inks as well, and you can heat emboss with those, but I didn't want the chance for any color to peek through on this, so I went ahead and went with my clear ink, which is Versamark. I'm stamping that down a few times since I'm using my Misty. Give it a good press, and then I'll go ahead and heat emboss this with Princess Gold embossing powder. This is from Ranger. It's a really great, pretty gold that you can use on your cards. It's a little bit brighter, and it's not as antique-y looking, I guess you could say. It's got a little bit of a brighter gold look. So I'm using my coffee filter under this to catch all of my embossing powder. That allows me to keep my embossing powder out. I can just set it off to the side. I don't have to clean it up each and every time. So that saves me a lot of time using that underneath. I'm also going to be using a paintbrush to go ahead and remove any little stray flecks of powder. You want this to be pretty clean looking because you're going for a double stamped look here. There's a look at what I'm going to be doing. You can see I've got a little bit of gold, and then I've got the color. They line up perfectly. That's why I'm using my Misty for this. I'm also using the creative corners down in the bottom corner there. That's going to allow me to, when I get to the right side and also the bottom, I'm not going to have to move my image or my paper right out in the center of my Misty and pray that it stays in place. Then I've got to try and line up my white cardstock here. That just allows me to know that everything's tucked in that corner nice and tight and everything's going to line up perfectly. That creative corner is a lifesaver for this technique. So I'm moving on to my next image, my next stamp. I'm going to go ahead and I ink that up with Chianti and stamp that down on the craft paper. Then I'll go ahead and use my Versamark ink once I've cleaned off my stamp and stamp that on the white cardstock. So basically, you're stamping one time on the craft cardstock with a colored ink, and then you come over to your white cardstock, just switch it out, make sure you clean off your stamp, and you're going to go ahead and stamp it down in the exact same place, and then heat emboss that with gold embossing powder. Now, once you get to a certain place, you're going to be able to stamp more images at once, and this technique will really go by quickly. So for this one, I was able to stamp 3 at a time because I had enough space in there to fit in my ink pads and ink up each stamp individually. So I had my little brown ink that I could ink up on that certain leaf, and then I could also use that Chianti ink and go ahead. Is that how you say it? I hope so. But anyway, I could stamp that down also on the left hand side, and then I used that Twilight up in the top right hand corner. So I was able to ink each stamp individually with their colors. Then I can go ahead and switch out, and this makes it really quick on the heat embossing because I can stamp 3 images all at once with my Versamark ink, give it a really good inking, and then I stamp them down a couple times since I am doing multiple stamps here. It just helps out. And then I can go ahead and sprinkle on that embossing powder and get 3 done at once. It really covers a lot of surface area doing it this way. So with these stamps, they are very, very, very detailed. They are gorgeous. I can't wait to show you a close-up of these. The veins and the leaves are just phenomenal. Now, when you're doing this, you need to make sure that each and every time you clean off your stamps, you're also wiping down the lid of your MISTI. I didn't do it very good one time, so I had a little bit of water, so this stamp fell off. That's okay, I can fix it. I just need to go ahead and look kind of through sideways to look straight underneath that stamp and line it up. I start with the tip and just kind of line it up as best I can. Then I can go ahead and pick it up again with the lid of my MISTI, and it's going to be in pretty much the right place. It might not be perfect, but that's okay. As long as you don't do it a million times, you'll be okay. If it's just one stamp, you'll be fine. So I finished stamping all of the card panel. Then I just had my one little last stamp here. I had my little brown ink, so I stamped it up, put it right in that little area that's has a little bit too much white. Then I stamped it down with Versamark ink once I cleaned it, and I'll go ahead and heat emboss that with gold. Now I have 2 panels that are exactly the same. One is just colorful, the other one is heat embossed. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut down my colorful panel. This is going to allow that gold to peek out from behind. You need to decide beforehand what you want to be on top, so that way you can go ahead and figure out which one you're going to cut, because once you cut, you can't really go back. So I went ahead and grabbed my craft panel. I'm going to cut off an inch from each of the longest sides. I'm going to leave the top, I'm going to leave it 5.5 inches, and then I cut down a 1/2 inch on each other side. There you can see once I place that over the card base, it lines up perfectly, and it's such a neat look. Now I wanted to add a little bit of shine to this, but I didn't want to cover up any of the color. So I grabbed this sheer shimmer spritz. This is also from Imagine Crafts. I have it in the gold. I also have copper, and I have the frost color. These are gorgeous. They're exactly what they sound like. It's just a very sheer but very shimmery mist that you can spray on, and it gives you this gorgeous shimmer to your crafts. It's not going to give it really any color. The copper has a little bit more color to it. I did spray it on here, but if it's too much, you can just dab it up, but the glitter will stay behind. So I went ahead and sprayed that down. You can see here I sprayed the copper as well. It was a little bit too much color, so I just dabbed it up quickly, but I'm still left with this gorgeous shimmer. I mean, it looks amazing on your card. There is a look at that. Once I let the light hit it, you can see just how much shine and sparkle this adds, but it doesn't take away any of the color that's left on there. It almost gives the ink a raised look. You'll see it in the final photos. So I wanted to go ahead and stamp on my sentiment next. I cut a piece of cardstock, white cardstock, that was 4.5 inches by about 1.25 inch. This fit my little sentiment perfectly. Again, this sentiment will be listed in the supply list. I stamped that on the outside. I also cut a craft mat for that. Very, very, very thin craft mat. I just wanted a little bit to kind of pop it away from that background. I went ahead and add some double-sided adhesive to the back of that, and then placed it right over that craft mat just so it had that little bit of craft back there to help it kind of pop away from that background. Like I said, I wanted to raise this up, so I did put double-sided adhesive with a little bit of fun foam on the back of that for dimension. And then for my panel that I cut down, my craft panel, I'm going to go ahead and very, very carefully, take your time when you're doing this, line it up with the stamped images and go ahead and place it right over the top of your card base. You want to make sure that you get it lined up as best you can on both sides. Don't just look at one side, because the other side might be a little wonky. You need to go ahead and make sure that both sides are lined up and then press it down. I'm using double-sided adhesive here for this, but you could also use a liquid adhesive if you wanted to. That would give you a little bit more playtime and you could move it around ever so slightly with that without ruining your back card base. Then I'm going to go ahead and place on my little sentiment with that added dimension. And I also added some enamel accents to the front. Now these colors that I'm using here are no longer available. However, you do have brown Nuvo drops, which are gorgeous as well. I'll leave those linked down in the description box since the enamel accents that I'm using here aren't available anymore. I added quite a few of these just to fill in all those little spaces and just to add a little bit more texture to this card, a little bit more dimension. So once that was done, I'm going to go ahead and show you a final picture here of what the outside of the card looked like. It was so much fun. You can see that little bit of raised you get with the ink once you add that shimmer spritz, and then the enamel accents really helped add that dimension. Now for the inside of the card, I wanted to go ahead and dress it up as well. I stamped a thinking of you sentiment right on the back with that fallen leaves ink. However, I messed up and I just kind of drugged the stamp, so I needed to cover that up. I went ahead and grabbed a piece of white cardstock, cut it down, added a craft mat to the back so it all looks like it was supposed to be there in the first place. It doesn't look like I messed up and I'm covering it up. But I went ahead and covered up that thinking of you. Then I'll take that same fallen leaves that I used before, the same thinking of you, and stamp it down once again, this time making sure to go straight down and straight up. I'm not that great of a stamper. Anytime I use acrylic blocks, I think I'm so used to my Misty now that I just kind of mess up all the time. So I fixed that very quickly. Then I came in with these two leaves that I use, the Twilight and also the Chianti. I hope again I'm saying that right. But I'm going to go ahead and stamp those down on either side of the sentiment just for a little added extra interest on the inside, and also to bring the outside of the card to the inside of the card. Now you can see here I did this before I did my enamel accents. So whenever you're finishing off the outside of your card, before you put any wet on the outside that has to dry, make sure you finish the inside and then go back and do the outside. Here are a few final looks at this finished card. This was such a fun technique, and these inks made it all the easier to do. That's going to do it for me today. I'm going to leave links on the left side of your screen that you can click on. You can also subscribe to my channel over there if you haven't already. My social media links are all in the description box, as well as the supplies. Thanks for watching and happy crafting.